Hello, everyone. Can you hear me fine? Yes. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here, like some new faces, some old faces. Welcome to ProductTank London. So the clicker always gives us some, well, it's not on. If you don't know what ProductTank is, what we do, we organize meetups events for product people and non-product people as well. And all the organizers are within the product world. We are part of the Mind the Product organization, and we are everywhere in the world. You can get involved as well, like our sponsor did today, our speaker did today, so you can talk, just come to one of us and ask us to be a speaker. You can host or sponsor, as Timebook did today. You can write as well from Mind the Product, so we have a lot of articles on the website, and you can get involved in that way. And you can also become a Mind the Product member. So speaking of Mind the Product, in March, we are going to have Mind the Product Con London, and you can use this discount code, or you can speak to your company and get tickets paid by them. But yeah, feel free to use this code, come back to us and ask for the code if you want to, and we'll see you all in March. So we are on LinkedIn, where we publish our events, the recordings as well, and so where you can find more information. You can scan the QR code and follow us there. And let's start straight away with our talk today. We're going to be talking about shaping product culture, and we have 4 amazing speakers. And yeah, we'll say, let's start. Oh, sorry, yeah, I forgot. We have a Slido as well. So if you have never come to our events, what we do a Q&A session at the end, and by scanning the QR code or inserting the code as well here, you can ask as many questions as you want, and you can vote as well for the question that you like the most. Hello. So we are going to show the code again later on, but yeah, that's the code to ask the questions. Again, as mentioned, we want to thank Timebook for sponsoring today's event, for allowing us to be in this venue, for the food and the drinks. So, yeah, speaking of which, I would like to invite Sanjeev from Timebook. Thank you.
I don't have very many slides, but thank you. That's one? Yeah. Well, I'm actually not from London, so hello, London. I'm really excited to be here for many reasons, because I've never actually spoken to that many product managers, and I now actually have a reason to do so. My head of products is going to be following me and telling you more about what we're doing, but it's very relevant to product managers. I don't look like that anymore. That was like a long time ago. So I think Serena or somebody found me on the web, and I've been hiding ever since. So I've been asked to tell one of my founder stories. Timebook's my 3rd startup. And I thought, yeah, that'd be cool. I've actually never told a lot of people my first story, so here goes. What do you think? 1990. I think most of you weren't born back then. Bright sunny day, come into work, and I realize there's nobody in their offices. And then I realize everybody's sort of gone to the canteen. I thought, it's very odd, 9 o'clock in the morning, everyone's at the canteen. I walk over there, and the CEO says, well, this is going to be very short. We're closing the company. And I spent 5 years of my life working there, working on some very cool technology using AI. This is 1990, by the way, doing voice recognition. And we came like that close to actually building Siri for the Mac back then. And so I was very, very sad, but we were all sacked. So I went over to my manager and I need some advice. What do I do now? What do you think I'm capable of doing? And he goes, I think you should go do your own startup. And I thought, really? You think I can do a startup? He said, yeah, absolutely. So super excited. I go home. I'm slowly starting to think about hundreds of ideas. Bad idea, but I did. No discovery, just shooting ideas off the top of my head. And go to bed, wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, absolutely petrified of what I just committed myself to. And then I realized I can't think of anything better than to give it a go. So long story short, I start thinking about ideas, and I had this idea and back then we didn't have the internet. So I'm really dating myself. And I thought, well, one of the challenges I had is we all had email systems, some of them running, there's a very famous one called CC Mail that ran on IBM PCs. And it was very popular in Silicon Valley. I thought, one thing I was always frustrated with is I couldn't send messages to somebody in another company. And I thought, wow, if I could build this box in the cloud, and you could just dial up and then point your email to somebody else, I could actually build a very interesting company out of that. Again, I started with my idea, okay, bad idea, to start with your idea. And I talked to a lot of people, and everyone said, that is really cool. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, let's go home and start coding. So I was doing that for about 3 months. Came back, and I had to sort of install this little widget in everybody's computer so that they could talk to each other. And so my friend said, well, let me just call the administrator, because I'm actually not allowed to put anything on my laptop, on my computer. And the admin comes in and says, well, how can I help? I said, well, I need to put this in there. And he goes, what is that? And I explained the whole thing to him. And he goes, you must be out of your mind. That's a completely security leak. He says, you're going to listen to every email, send it up to your servers, and I hope that you don't leak it out to somebody else. No, it's all encrypted. He goes, no, it's not. I thought, oh, God, there went my dream. So after 3 months of slogging it out, I realized I'd completely blown it. Zero discovery, or very poor discovery. And I went home in almost tears, actually, because I'd worked really, really hard to come up with something very cool. And I thought, well, there goes the end of my life as a founder. Until the next day, I met somebody at a party, and he was what we call a mortgage banker. And he said, and I started telling my story about what I do and what I was aspiring to do. And he said, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who's been talking about communicating with his sales force, through a brokerage firm, and I think you might be able to help him. I'm like, oh, I'm hungry to do something. And so Monday morning, I got this interview. I get this opportunity to talk to his friend. So I show up there, and I've been seated, and I'm sitting right by his secretary, and I'm watching her feeding the same piece of paper into a fax machine over and over and over again. So I went over thinking, maybe I can help her. Maybe there's something wrong. She doesn't know how to use the fax machine. And then I asked her, thank you. I'm at 5 minutes already. And I said, can I, do you know how to use a fax machine? She says, oh, of course I do. I send the same fax every day to about 100 places. And I started to realize what the problem was and why I had been summoned here. And so went back to my seat, actually developed a complete value proposition, and 5 minutes later, I'm in the office of a buyer, which is this gentleman who is running the mortgage company. And he described to me what the problem was. And I said, I think I have a solution. And he said, well, how would you do it? And so I had made up this whole story. And I came up with a product description in 5 minutes, described it to him, and he goes, well, if you can do that, I'll buy. And I said, well, what do you pay for sending all these faxes out? And he says, well, it's a cost of a long distance call, like 25 pence a minute or something like that. I'm like, okay, I'll charge you that. I rushed home, called my friend who's in telecoms, and I said, can you sell me long distance for less than 25p? And I was thinking, I can make a margin doing this. And that was the beginning of my first startup. I actually went home, spent a month, and started writing code. But this time, I realized I had a real customer who had a real need. And there was no way for them to actually build it on their own. So I spent a month building it and come back. And then I asked him, are there many of you like this? And he goes, yeah, about 4,000 bankers in this country. And I said, would you happen to have their phone number? And he hands me a directory. I thought, wow, I have 4,000 potential customers. I have a working product. And that was the launch of my first company. I can go on, but I think I'm at 2 minutes at this point. 3 minutes, thank you. Fast forward 8 years, we were one of the fastest growing companies in Silicon Valley. And it's now 1999, and we're at the height of the internet boom. And there was a lot of silly money running around, people buying companies. And at that point, I decided it's time to end. It's time to sell the company. And we did. And it was just one of these amazing outcomes. So the moral of the story here is you must understand the need of a customer, number one. Build something that a customer actually couldn't do on their own. Because in this case, all those bankers were actually sending out this single fax to thousands of people, but they were only doing it once a day. So it just didn't make economic sense for them to, buy and operate with labor hundreds of fax machines. And so it was a complete win-win, simple pricing, and we made it really easy to adopt. And so having gone through this, I felt like at the end of that, I thought, wow, simple pricing, make it easy to adopt, solve a real hard problem for a customer, and I started to develop a whole playbook in my head of how you do startups. I think I got very lucky though. This was my first startup, and I'm really glad because what that allowed me to go on to doing is then building my second startup. And I was able to, and by the way, without any venture capital, we bootstrapped the first one. And the only time we raised any money was we just had to grow really fast and we had to buy more equipment. So we had very little venture capital in. And likewise, we took our winnings, me and my co-founder, and we went off and did the second startup. And gosh, I don't think I have time for that second startup, but I'm happy to talk to you about founding companies. But before I end, I meant to ask a question. Are there any founders in the room? Wow. I'd love to talk to you guys, actually, because I love hearing founder stories, and I hope to meet you maybe on my next trip. Are there any aspiring founders? Wow, that's really awesome. Well, if I can be of any help, right, I've been doing this for 35 years, and it gives me great joy to talk to founders, talk to aspiring founders, and just be helpful. So I'll leave my details with you if you're interested. Catch me before I leave. And I look forward to getting to know many of you. Thank you very much. Cheers. Yep, thank you.
Oh, yeah, here we go. Me. Hi. Am I in the good place? Hi, everyone. Wow, this is cool. So yes, I'm David. I came aboard what Sanjeev is trying to build with his third startup, with Timebook, a couple of months ago, and I've been having a lot of fun since then, getting deeper into the product community, especially here in London. We didn't say, I guess, Timebook. It's an AI-powered discovery tool that helps product teams identify their biggest opportunities and build the right things by providing a structured platform with embedded AI, specially trained for discovery work. Timebook guides product teams through the discovery process while automating key analysis at every step. I'm conscious that we've got a few minutes of stage time. Just in our role as sponsor of the event, you'll hear from some more kind of illustrious and maybe familiar faces after us. But we're really excited to be here just to tell you a tiny bit about our product and the problem we're trying to solve. And we're especially glad to be doing that against this backdrop of this discussion about product culture. Should have gone on to my title slide because I guess, yeah, as I say in my title, for us this is a really sort of hand-in-glove thing with the kind of process enablement, best practice adoption, automation support kind of value that we're trying to provide through the Timebook tool. I guess I want to sort of tee up a little bit of what I want to say with my few minutes on stage and what the other speakers are going to talk about later, by just quickly asking ourselves, what are we talking about why are we talking about culture? So I guess culture, what we usually mean by this word, right, is something that sort of sits underneath some things that are more visible, underneath maybe certainly some processes, some behaviors, even the mindset. So it supports other aspects of doing our jobs well. And it has an interpersonal aspect as well, I think. Culture, we often mean kind of like the way we behave towards each other. You can adopt a mindset on your own, but culture is something we do together. Why does product need its own culture? Why aren't we talking about just like corporate culture or human culture? I mean, humans have been sort of like building and trading things forever. My take on this from, I guess, 12 years in not product, you know, kind of in big companies in old industries before now 8 years in the world of product and let's say sort of tech and disruption, is because of what we need to do as tech disruptors, as product managers. We're dealing with uncertainty. It's not supposed to be easy, right, to think of ways of doing things that no one thought of until now, or to make money out of nothing overnight. It's not supposed to be easy. We face a lot of uncertainty. And that uncertainty calls for a way of working, you know, all this kind of like non-waterfall, be prepared to make a lot of missteps and learn and iterate from each one. And all the way through this, you're counteracting your biases, right? The way your human body is evolved to deal with problems, all these biases that make us think of solutions very quickly when we hear a problem, the things that make us fall in love with our first idea, the bias to, I guess, basically overestimate our own confidence. These are all very natural human things that are just not suited to this super fast world of tech and of disruption. And this was something completely new to me when I made that jump from the non-product world to the product world. I was really conscious of that difference in culture. And we use terms and techniques like this, like being user-centric, outcome-oriented, being agile. We do that to counteract our biases. That's the process, the stance we have to adopt just to survive in this world where everything changes so fast, and we're trying to do something that's inherently difficult and uncertain. Can a PM do that unilaterally when the rest of the org around them still expects them to be certain of things, to make forecasts of things, to commit to things? No, right? And when the org tries to make them do that, that's when you get, even as a PM trying to do all the right things, you get low psychological safety, you get politics, you get forced into it's hard not to play it safe and tinker with the product that you're working on, only implement things that you know will work, even if they're low value to the North Star you're trying to pursue. You get hippos, right? You get deferring decisions from the people that have a lot of data to people that don't have much data and have no choice really but to give you advice or their input based on their gut. So this is why we need a product culture, because it has these kind of characteristics and it helps individual PMs do what they need to do to thrive. And I guess even in the 8 years since I moved over from non-product to product, I've seen that sort of done in all sorts of different ways, sort of well and badly. It's a really hard thing to do. One of the things I found really interesting as I've been trying to kind of like piece together for myself along this journey, why it is that some, we hear these, empowered especially, and comfortable with uncertainty, no blame. We hear these terms a lot. They're very kind of, let me move on to my next one, actually. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, these are kind of like well-attested terms, right? We hear them from all our thought leaders. They're sort of very fundamental to the work that we do. And it makes sense to me that they are. But as I've sort of come to understand why that is that way and why we hear those terms so much, to think about the other aspects of different organizations' cultures that are maybe not so kind of fundamental, not so required by the work that we do, maybe just a bit more like emergent and arbitrary based on the personality of the founder or the senior team or other people, where the company came from maybe. I don't have very long to dash through this, so I'm just going to kind of like flash a few up that have always been interesting to me, kind of different features of organizations that you see in their culture that I think don't directly work for or against. They can still produce really good products. And some of these I think the other speakers tonight are going to also come back to, but kind of like we talk a lot about founder mode versus manager mode, right? I think there's at least a charitable interpretation of founder mode that isn't completely against kind of empowerment. Individual versus team accountability. This is a choice an organization makes about whether responsibility for decisions is something that you co-own or sort of, but if you make the accountability at the individual level, you give people more direction about their own growth. So it's a real choice. I'm just for speed, I think I'm just going to kind of flash these rather than talk to them all. But these are all things that in the few organizations I've moved around in the last few years, I've seen kind of like different versions of this employed. And they're not necessarily kind of good things or bad things. They're just really interesting cultural factors they obviously make a huge difference to you as an employee, to you as a PM, whether you feel like a good fit in those organizations, but they don't necessarily bias the outcome. Here are a few of my own that always, I guess, I find very difficult to take out of my own personality and the way that what I bring into my teams. So I mean, I guess obligation to dissent is something I picked up in my very first job at McKinsey. It's a particular way of being really flat in your hierarchy, really encouraging everybody from the most junior to the most senior to voice any kind of like concern that's in their head. Low process is a way that suits me to work, and I find it hard not to bring that into my teams. I love having a hypothesis for everything, and I'm a very strong J. I really love to ruthlessly focus. And so these are characteristics, sort of cultural behaviors that I bring into my teams. I think there's a really interesting question in here about whether these kind of more arbitrary cultural factors are something we should actually try and suppress in ourselves, try and keep out of imposing on others or bringing into our teams or expecting of others, where that might be sort of counter to any kind of like diversity or inclusivity. But again, if you don't bring them in, that's counter to your kind of like your authenticity and your differentiation. So for me, there's quite an interesting question here about whether these more arbitrary things are, you should be keeping them out of your work. But that's probably one for another night. Gone high tech, so I didn't forget to say anything that I wanted to cover. Let me just sort of finish up by circling back on why culture matters, in my view, and a cheeky plug for Timebook. So, we hear again and again, especially these kinds of terms about the culture that we need to support our product managers. And it makes sense to me from the experience that I've had in the industry so far, because I've seen what happens when we don't support the kind of don't just do it, avoid spurious accuracy, kind of thinking that we need from our PMs. We need to encourage these kind of techniques and patterns and behaviors, and you need the right culture and psychological safety to achieve that. And when you sort of start counteracting your evolutionary bias with thoughtful frameworks, that becomes the sort of stuff you can really enable and turbocharge with tools. Tools that have structures that kind of like guide you. They reinforce those patterns. They don't undermine them by forcing you to something that is inherently solution-oriented or project-like in its behavior, that kind of stuff. So structures that help you do those things. And of course, nowadays, increasingly, like co-piloting, automation, it's so much easier to be comprehensive and objective in the way that you make use of data when you've got AI watching all the corners for you. So that's what we're trying to do with Timebook. I guess that elevator pitch again, it's a discovery platform, AI-powered. It helps product teams identify their biggest opportunities and build the right things. We're just about to open our beta, maybe next week, maybe the week after, coming days. So it's more or less the last chance to join the waitlist. I mean, this is exactly the kind of community we want to serve. So it would be amazing if we found that a bunch of you guys were keen to join our waitlist and join our beta when we're ready to open. We'll be really excited to have you. There are a few Timebook people in the room. Joe, obviously Sanjeev, you've seen speaking. There's one or two more. Merch as well. You should definitely feel free to help yourself too. But I really hope that we see more of you guys, and we look forward to sort of helping the product community in every way that we can. And thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sanjeev and Davey, for your story and your introduction as well. So I can see already there are already some questions coming through, but feel free, that's the Slido, keep adding them, keep voting them. And we're going to go through to our next speaker. I would like to welcome Jason. Thank you.
Which way is which? That way. So I've been given, I normally like to walk around on stage, and I've been given strict instructions to stay basically here for the entire duration. So I'm going to ask you all to give me a kind of a pantomime style stop or something like that if I wander too far from this kind of zone of inclusion, I guess. But anyway, I'm already starting to wander. So I'm going to give a talk tonight about applying product management to product management. And you might look at that title and think, oh God, he's disappeared up his own ass. Finally, we've kind of reached content max. We're in a situation where we're just applying product management to everything. But I promise you, by the end of it, it will make sense. You can connect with me on all those places as well if you really want to, if you haven't already. And if you don't, that's fine. I won't feel offended. So we're here tonight to talk about how to create a product culture. And in theory, that sounds really easy because there's so much inspiration out there. There are so many people telling us how to do it. There are podcasters, and there are newsletter writers, and there are conference organizers, and there are people that you meet in places like this, and there are books, and there are newsletters. There are all these different places to make it look like this should be easy because they've gone out there and they've maybe even worked for the best companies, or they've at least gone and sort of had a look around, and they've come back and they've told us all the things that work, and all we need to do is implement those things, and we'll get there too. It just sounds simple. But as product managers, we're here to, whenever we try and do anything, we're here to, we have to ask why, normally about 5 times. But if we sit there and say, well, why do we even want a product culture? And we might sit there and say, well, look, these are the best companies in the world, allegedly. And therefore, they must be onto something. Like, why would we not want to work like them? You might sit there and think, well, that's going to help us deliver superior results. Like, we're going to deliver better results for our users, for our customers, for our business. If we just do these things that they do in those places, that their culture enables for them. You might sit there selfishly and think, well, at least we'll be recognized as well. We won't just be seen as those pencil pushers in the corner passing tickets around. We're actually going to get some credit for the work that we do and be seen as the business partners that we actually are. And ultimately, that makes our work more rewarding because we know that we're having an impact and we're, delivering for our business and not just being told what to do. Now, there's a problem here because the previous, so David's presentation has a different list to what I've got on my list. So I'm hoping that if we put these 2 lists together, we'll actually have a definitive answer as to what a product culture is. But you might sit there and say, what are some of the aspects of a product culture? Well, vision and strategy. Like, we have a vision. We have a compelling vision of the future, and we have a strategy, the choices that we've made how to get there, and also, crucially, what we haven't, what we're not going to do to get there. We're going to prioritize outcomes over outputs. We want to make sure that we're doing things based on the results that they deliver, not just the work that we've done. We might talk, as David did, about empowered teams. This idea that, we should be given problem spaces to attack, a team to attack it, and then we should be able to go and do that the best way we see fit, as long as we deliver on those outcomes. We want to say that we have a relentless user focus. We want to empathize with and understand the jobs to be done of our users, of our customers, and make sure that we're solving those the best way possible and prioritizing for impact. So we're not just sitting there tossing any old work out. We're sitting there doing the most important things, and we're solving those problems in the most effective way. And we're doing that based on evidence. We're not just sitting there, going on gut feel. We're sitting there saying, well, we know, or we at least know as best we can, based on all of this stuff that we found out, this is the best bet for us to take now. We might even consider ourselves the CEO of product, but we probably shouldn't. The CEO is ultimately the CEO of product. But, hopefully we at least have some level of autonomy and some level of impact. But what do we see instead? Well, very often we see a lack of any strategy at all. It just seems that we're just bouncing from task to task based on whatever comes up next, and there's no real coherence to any of it, and we can't say no to anything. In B2B companies, we'll see a lot of sales-led decision-making. We'll be sitting there saying, well, whatever happens for the next deal, that wins, which leads to this kind of feature factory mentality. We're not really shipping based on impact at all anymore. We're just shipping stuff out the door and moving on to the next thing that we've been told to work on. We might, instead of sitting there saying that we're in this kind of team that's been empowered to attack a space, we're sitting there with loads of dependencies across loads of different teams, which leads us to slow down. We struggle to deliver any impact at all. And then there's also the kind of the status quo bias that you might get from some leaders in these companies. Oh, that won't work here. We're not like Amazon. We can't work like that. We have to work a different way because we're a banking company and banking companies work like this. That's a sad tale, but it does come up, and it comes up a lot. And by the way, I have a good authority from people that work at Amazon and Facebook and all these other places that they don't work like that either. Not all the time anyway. Now, that's not to say that they don't work more like that, but there's feature factories in all of these companies, and I've spoken to people from some of these bits of teams in some of these companies that have a hell of a time. Pardon me. And also then we touched on it as well, founder mode. Like this idea that, ultimately the hippo effect is in full effect. We're just being told what to do by an alleged visionary founder that apparently has all the answers, despite none of them actually ever seeming to answer any questions really. So these are common. They're not ubiquitous. Different companies have different aspects of this, but they are common. So it all makes it feel really difficult. And it is difficult, but it feels difficult in a way because what we tend to do by going to events like this and listening to podcasts and going to community things and all that, we end up kind of talking to ourselves a bit, using our own vocabulary. We end up using things that only we really care about. I've never yet gone up to the CEO of a sales-led company and said, we should focus on outcomes over outputs, and had anything other than just be kicked out of the office and not invited to the next meeting. So we're talking to ourselves to some extent, and also I think a lot of the times we find it really difficult to demonstrate the impact of what we're doing or why we should be working in these ways in a way that actually resonates with what these people already care about. It's important. Like, you can't persuade someone to fix something if you can't really even explain why you should fix it. Now, before we bring this home, I want to do a little aside and a kind of an imaginary process that probably doesn't exist in any company about how we make products. So we start a new product initiative or 0 to 1 thing that we're working on. We understand our users. So we speak to our users. We do direct discovery with them. We find out their jobs to be done. We get feedback from the sales, customer success, account teams, whoever else in the company is speaking to users as well. We gather the evidence. We synthesize those outputs. We combine that with usage data and market research. We combine it with competitor analysis and all of the other things that we can do to understand the space. And then we collaborate and ideate. We might do user story mapping exercises, or we might do design sprints, or whatever we do. We'll have some kind of collaborative process where the engineers and the designers and the product managers will come together and work on the solutions for those problems. And then we'll prioritize. We'll relentlessly and rigorously prioritize to make sure that we're only working on the most important things, and we'll build the smallest thing possible so that we can go and get that out to the market, and we can give that to users, get it into their hands, get feedback, measure the impact. And we'll do that again and again and again till we all die of the heat death of the universe or an asteroid strikes. This is the cycle for product managers. But if you live by the sword, you have to die by the sword. And by that I mean, you can't talk all about this kind of iterative cycle prioritization thing for one part of your job, but then say that it's all or nothing for the other part of the job. And you get this with agile people as well. A lot of agile people will be like, well, if you're not doing all of the agile stuff, you're not doing the agile stuff at all and you suck. Or you'll get the people saying, well, if you're not doing all of these product things, then you're not a proper product manager. Or you're not doing product properly. Or you're just, you're going to get made redundant by AI or whatever. So we're sitting here being told by many quarters that if we don't do these things, we kind of suck. However, again, if we live by the sword, we die by the sword. The way that we worked, or we notionally at least work on products, can be applied to how we make a product culture. So we understand our users. We speak to our stakeholders, our internal stakeholders, the different teams and colleagues that we have. We understand what their priorities are, how they believe that we should be working. And we also assess what the business needs. It's very different working, for example, for a private equity funded company versus a bootstrap company versus a VC-backed company versus a PLC. They all have different needs. No one size fits all. But we gather the evidence. We synthesize that feedback. We collect internal data. We look at any kind of internal statistics that we have or any kind of ideas about the things that are holding us back or driving us forward. We collaborate. We ideate. We get the teams together. We work out what the problems are, whether people agree that they're problems, and get agreement at the very least on the fact that there is a problem. Because you can't get agreement on a solution if you can't even get agreement that there is a problem. We prioritize and build. So again, we rigorously prioritize and we take a small step, the smallest concrete step that we can take to make progress in whichever direction we believe we should take it. And we launch and we measure. So we make those operational changes, we track the results, we measure the impact of those changes, and we do that again and again until we all die, or we get hit by an asteroid, or the heat death of the universe. And we just continuously improve as best we can based on whatever evidence comes up in front of us. So there's this additional kind of slide that it's actually stolen from another presentation around like how to choose what sorts of things to focus on. And I kind of got this sort of matrix quadrant thing with things that we can do. It's just got a laser point on it. So things that we can do, things that we can't do, things that we need to do or want to do, things that we don't need to do or don't want to do. And we can sit there and say, well, look, if there are things that we believe that we should be doing, and we are able to do them, well, we should probably just do them. Like that's kind of almost like the table stakes that we can just get done, try and demonstrate impact. If we don't need to do them or don't want to do them and we can't do them, well, again, it's pretty easy. We just try not to do them. Like, what's the point? There's always going to be one person, like, Jill from accounts or something like that, that really wants you to do that thing. But it should be a pretty easy discussion to not do those things. If you don't need, want to do them and you can do them, i.e. you're able to do them but you want to stop doing them, then you need to make a case for why you shouldn't be doing them. But you have to make a case based on evidence. You can't just say that I don't fancy it or Marty Kagan said not to do that. Like, Marty Kagan's probably right, but that's not going to win the argument. You need to come up with evidence as to why this is a thing that you should stop doing and try and de-risk it and show them small stages towards kind of basically decommissioning that versus trying to go all in, or if you get told to keep doing it, spitting your dummy out and taking your ball home. It's not going to work. Or if you need to do it and you can't do it yet, then you need to find a small win. It's kind of the flip side of making your case for the kind of evidence-backed decommissioning is get the evidence, find a small slice of work that you can do, try and do that work and demonstrate the impact of what it is that you're doing so that you can then get permission to buy, to do more things. So I'm not going to say that this solves everything, but it's definitely a sort of a good framing to sit there and say, well, how can we decide where to focus our efforts and what do we need to do if we don't have permission yet? And this ultimately enables you to build a backlog for change. Like, you're not going to change all of your company overnight, especially in a larger company, but even small companies tend to be suspiciously difficult to change, like these speedboats versus tankers. The speedboats seem to have anchors on them as well half the time. So you need to build a backlog for change, and as with any backlog, you need to ruthlessly prioritize it, make sure that you're not just doing the thing at the top just because that was already there, make sure that you're refining it and making sure that you have all the evidence that you need to make sure to enable you to make good decisions around the priority of what you work on next. And there's a concept called an Overton window. Who's heard of an Overton window? There you go. I'll probably explain it really badly now and then you'll shout at me. But an Overton window is, loosely speaking, it's actually it's a political term, which obviously is great for the upcoming elections. We can all start thinking about politics again now. But it's the idea that there's a range of options that people, in this case, your stakeholders or your bosses or whatever, a range of options that are currently okay for them, that they'll be okay with, and a range of options that are just unthinkable at the moment because they just don't believe that those are the things that you should be doing. And the idea is that over time, that window can shift. So there can be compelling events, maybe something comes up in a business that makes it all of a sudden obvious that you should start thinking about a thing that you couldn't think about before. And as a PM, if you want to drive a product culture, you can try to work out or identify those and then try to use that as leverage to get the thing done. And that all sounds very kind of fluffy and hypothetical. The only quick example I can think of is at one company I worked at where we had a long-standing problem with customer onboarding, but it was never seen as a problem or something that we should prioritize productizing, simply because it was fine, we could just throw people at it. But we got to the point where we stopped being able to sell the software because there was such a long queue to get people on board the system that we basically couldn't get people to sign because the onboarding time was too long. That was the point when people started to be a bit more keen to start thinking about actual product-led onboarding and automation. So it's a bit of a noddy example in a way, but that kind of thing where you can say, okay, that thing means that we really should try and do this now. Another thing that I always recommend that PMs do is be confident and assertive. Like, you should stake your claim. You should state your case. If you've got the evidence, if you can kind of prove and show your work, you should be able to make a case. You're not going to win every, let's call it argument, because you never know. Like, there's going to be other things, and hopefully if you have a good dialogue with your leadership team, you'll be in a situation where, sometimes you kind of win some and you lose some. But I never recommend dying on pointless hills. The idea there being that there are going to be some things in any company where, due to whatever bias or whatever person, one part of the leadership team, you're just not going to get to do that yet. Like, the amount of evidence would need to be so strong, or the pain would have to be so hard to kind of get over their existing biases that you're just not going to get to do that yet. So you could sit there, jump up and down, stick your fingers in your ears, scream and shout, and burn every single bit of political capital and kind of social capital you have in a company. Or you could try and focus on something else for now and wait for that Overton window to move so that you're in a position that you can maybe try and leverage at that point. Because again, if you're just going to kind of seem that sort of extremist in the corner, you too are not going to get invited to those meetings, and they're going to talk to other people about doing the stuff instead. And my final takeaway, and this always sounds better in my head than it does when I say it, is that better is better than not better. So, but the idea here is a simple one. It's like, look, we all know, I'm sure no one in here, who in here works for a perfect company? There you go. So for those at home, no one put their hands up. So, and that's fair enough. Like, no one's ever going to work for a perfect company. I sometimes say that if you look at the other side of look at the grass on the other side, if it's greener, it's because it's been spray painted. And it's probably got thistles in it as well. Or it's AstroTurf and you're going to get burnt when you fall on it. There's no perfect company. All we can do is try to make incremental changes and make things better as we go. Now, sometimes we have to make big changes because there's a big emergency. Cool, let's throw behind that at that stage. But under normal operating procedures or sort of circumstances, whatever you can do to make small incremental changes, you still end up getting a lot further along than you would if you just try and do everything and you can't, so you stop. There's always something that you can do. And that's me, so I'm obviously happy to connect with absolutely anyone, happy to chat after this. I know we've got a Q&A as well, but hopefully that's been of some use to someone.
Thank you. I can see some people on the side. Feel free to come over and take a seat as well. So last but not least, we go Jorge. Sorry, just as a reminder, Slido, don't forget to vote for your questions because we're going to start from the most voted ones, but keep them coming. And I'll pass it over to Jorge.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about culture, but it will be more of how does culture look in practice and hopefully give some insights to all of you that you can take home, well, to work and do them. So I like to call it shaping it as a PM without a senior title, because there's one thing about culture that sometimes the idea is that it's senior leadership who says this is the culture and this is what you need to do. But the reality or the claim I'm trying to make is everyone has a take on culture and it is much more in the practice of it. So I'll get to it later. So why do I care about this? I think in my 8 years in product management, I did about 5 years in what seemed like an optimization problem, which is how do I just gain more market share? And then these last 3 years, I've become closer to the build stage, and it's been a lot of uncertainty, low confidence on data, and just placing a lot of product bets. So I feel like culture has been a great way of kind of, making that certainty sort of less horrible. So I like this imagery because it shows culture as a frame of reference, and as we're working towards a business outcome, of course this reference changes. So when I see culture, I see a snapshot in time, and I see how does culture look today versus that frame of reference. And I think this is where I kind of deposit this first idea of like everyone has a take on product culture, which is like, where am I going? Am I still going to the same place? What am I achieving, or what have I achieved? And more importantly, how am I achieving it? So going back to this mid-level PM's note, I really think that it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in this bottom space where you're working with a cross-functional team and you're responsible for a business outcome, this is important to you, this is how you get conviction, you influence. Or if you're a product manager or a people manager and you are working with teams of PMs, well, this is also important because you empower teams, you understand where the remit lies, and essentially you're just trying to drive direction. So I want to talk a little bit about how I've sort of looked at my experience and give you all 3 examples of how this has worked in these past 3 years. So this is a framework, or if the word framework is not of your taste, we can call it 3 questions. How do we evaluate culture? The bottom line is, what do you believe in? The middle line is, how are you acting? And then the top line is, if there's a tangible object or artifact that kind of displays that. So I like this graphic because it shows this back and forth. It's this thing that has to work in unison, Because if I say I'm transparent, but then my actions do not show it, or my artifacts, there's no information flowing, then I don't know if we can really say we're a transparent culture. So my 3 examples, I'll center them around artifacts because they're easier to see than the rest. So the first one we'll look at is at a roadmap. You can't see the white too good, but okay. This is a very simple roadmap. We have, in this case, I had 2 outcomes tied into different audiences. One was the buyer persona and the other one was an end user. As I said, this is finding product market fit, so everything's a bet. And as Jason said, sometimes you don't want to die on the hill, so you're sort of putting everything, your bets there, and hoping that things look and go as you think they were. So in this particular case, something I started doing to really bring co-ownership to the table with my teams is I started jotting down my main assumptions on each of those swimming lanes. And I talked about this with a couple of people in the community. I think there was a really cool line from a friend called Sean who said, you can call them sort of like leap of faith assumptions, which is if at any point this is not true, then your whole roadmap, it kind of has to change. So me, as I'm charging towards a, business outcome, if that assumption is not true, I want to know really quickly, be it by a sales team member or be it by a developer team member or whoever. So putting them up there, I think really helps on just driving that dialogue. Now, going back to my little diagram in this middle column, which is this middle row, which I like, is this essentially signaling as a PM that you're open for feedback. You don't know all the answers and you really want people to chime in and help you get to the answers. So I'm gonna move to the second. This second practice was very interesting. This was a company where it was really hard. We didn't know where to start. And everything was so tangled together that every conversation always just kind of like fell on its face. So what I started doing was this explicit list of what is out of scope. And more than just being this crucial exercise of all of the things you cannot sneak into your sprints, it really helped being very transparent about what you're trading off. So you're showing everyone in your team what are the things that are important and the things that you are explicitly saying this is not important, it comes later. And then, this is a really nice thing, you can reinforce it by showing your decision rationales. So if you have a meeting with your team lead or with someone, you can post in your Slack channel, hey, this is the decision, this is why I'm taking it, comments in the thread if you don't agree, and let's politely talk it out. So in this framework, this middle section or this middle row, really the signal that I got from doing this practice is this: I really care about empowering others to decide. I want to show them how I make decisions. So when I'm not there, people can, kind of figure out what to do. There was a manager in my previous company called this like the passive presence. I really like it. It's if you take yourself out of the room, can people kind of, take your decision-making framework into consideration. Okay, finally, and this one is way simpler, but I think it's very useful. Today, there's a lot of AI transcript full notes, and in my experience, no one reads that. So I think TLDRs are a great way of just surfacing all of that key context. So if you have an external engagement, you can link your full chats down there, but if you really surface one-liners, two-liners that your team should know, that really helps that information flow. Then if you have internal discussions and we had a conversation about descoping something or some of the unknowns, then you can also do that and also link the notes if somebody wants to. No? But essentially, again, the signal of this culture that I'm trying to bring with this one tactic is I think everyone should know key information. I want it to be transparent because we're all trying to build this business outcome together, and it's not that I know better than, my teammates. So kind of wrapping this all up, this would be a rather cheesy wrap up, but the truth is all PMs have a huge influence on product culture because by definition, our role is to guide in direction, influence change, move things. So I hope everyone can kind of take this simple framework and use it as a tool to self-evaluate whenever you're there, whenever you're kind of just finding the need to it. This is one way I would suggest doing it for those who are interested. You know, you can go back to your practice and think, what are some practices that I do slightly different to that one book or that one talk or my peer or my boss? And you can see, I can run this through a 3-level framework and understand why am I doing it differently, hoping to find an insight that says, oh, I think this is the piece that I'm trying to influence that I haven't been really, it's not out there, it's sort of hidden between your practices. And likewise, if you are working with a team and you're observing or you're managing another PM, you can have this lens and sort of help them into, instead of saying them, you have to do better culture, you can give them more actionable feedbacks of like, you're doing this right or you're doing this wrong, I would suggest doing this. But yeah. So thank you. If anyone wants to chat, here are my things, and thank you for the chat.
Thank you so much for sharing your framework. Well, we are a bit we got time for some more networking, for some more drinks before we come back for our Q&A. But that's the link. So yeah, have some fun, network, and we are gonna meet here in 15 minutes, 10 past. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely blew on time. I didn't know. Oh, look at you. Well done. Well done. That was really good.
I'm gonna put this in a way. Ooh. Any questions? 20 minutes of Q&A.
Nice.
Nice. Oh, who's calling me? My mom.
Cute.
We can take a seat, yes. So my mom FaceTiming me.
Where would you like me?
Oh, you can sit on this side here.
With this side.
I'm gonna pass like share the microphone and I'll pass it over as well. Are you ready? Great, thank you so much for coming back. So you're still on time to ask more questions, to vote for the ones that have been already asked. But let's start, and I'll pass over the microphones. There's one over there. So the first one from Megan. When looking for a new PM role, what are some of the good questions to ask during the interview process to understand wherever a company has a strong product culture? Who wants to go first?
Do you have a strong... No, that's not going to work. I think a good question to ask in general, whatever you're trying to find out, is to try and get an understanding of how their last big decision was made. So, like, get them to talk, like, whoever, like, maybe you're talking to the VP of product or something like that, or whoever you get to talk to. Like, what was your last big initiative that you worked on, and where did that decision come from, and what happened with it, and trying to get them to, because, like, the good thing with this is that you could ask that question of the person in the most atrocious company in the world or the best company in the world, if those two extremes exist, and they would confidently tell you everything that happened as if it was fine, probably, because they don't know any different probably within their context. So they'll be very honest about it. And you're also asking about concrete things that happened versus like hypotheticals, like, oh, how would you do this? Like that's useless, like, because they know that question's coming. But if you ask them what did happen, it can give you some little clues.
Anyone want to add anything else?
I don't know if I got enough. I think that's good advice in general, isn't it? To sort of to ask for the examples of things, to ask for specific experiences, because yes, I guess that's right. Sort of everyone knows the buzzword bingo. Everyone knows the aspirational state to describe, and it's actually sometimes even hard to know when you're describing it that you're lying to yourself as the interviewer on the other end of the question. So I think that's right. And I guess I wonder if it would be good to sort of, I'm sort of going to relate this back to something I brought up in my talk, I suppose, about there are some things that maybe we just like all agree are unequivocally good about product culture, things you need, but then there are some other things that are more just sort of arbitrary and idiosyncratic, and some of those things will be a good fit for you and some of them will not be a good fit for you. And those sorts of questions I think you can probably explore with your hiring manager more candidly, because there is no right answer. You're just trying to get a feel for which way on some of these questions they go, they feel that it is, or they expect it to be as the leader of that team. So if you can focus on, as well as some kind of like good, bad, aspirational things, you can also focus on kind of more ambivalent things where some of them will be a good fit for you and some of them won't.
Nice, thank you. So let me just unlock my phone. Next question. Oh, someone is voting. It strikes me that no one has mentioned accountability as a core part of product culture. Why is that?
I did. I'll go very quickly first, but I mean, I did briefly mention accountability, and the way I raised it was just to sort of contrast individual versus team accountability. And again, I see this as something that, you know, both work. It's not. I don't see one of those as good and one of those as bad. I've worked in sort of both environments, and I think I know that I have a preference for team accountability, and I found individual accountability quite sort of oppressive and exposing. And I don't know why I feel that way actually, but I've learned that I learned that I do. And so I know that that's my preference, and it's the bias that I take into my teams. But I think both can work. So I did allude to it in that way, but I don't know if I have a great deal more to say about it. So I'll pass over.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me give you a slightly different perspective, since I'm no longer a product manager. I don't wake up in the morning thinking about accountability as a CEO, and I've come to the conclusion there's no point in me talking about accountability. So I think about impact. And at the end of the day, I listen for impact and I observe impact. So I just have a different operating system in my head these days. It was very different, 10 years ago, but that's changed for me.
I have a question follow-up from this. Do you think that other CEOs and other managers think the same way?
I don't know, because most of the time when I meet with CEOs, we're all getting drunk. So I have no idea, but I'm happy to ask that question next time.
Thanks. Let us know.
I agree. I think accountability is the default. Like, as a PM, if you're not accountable, it's really hard to lead anyone or influence anyone. And if you shy away from it, then it's really tough. I think building accountability with your teams, that's a whole other topic and a hard one, because for them it might be easier for an engineer to kind of draw the line and say, I was just building what you wanted to build, and bridging that might have another conversation around that.
I think accountability comes as part of empowerment. We talk, and that was one thing that I called out, was this. Okay, it's a cliche. Everyone's talking about empowerment, but this idea that it's the team's responsibility to both own the problem space and the value that they deliver, and then deliver it, and that kind of, it is implicit in there. I think it is interesting at that point about when people don't have accountability. And I was literally speaking to someone today, talking about their doing like an advisory call with someone, and they were very much saying we have a culture here very much of the leaders decide what we're going to build, we build it, and we hand it back to them. And if it goes wrong, there's an explicit their accountability, because we were told to do it. So that's not a product culture, you'd probably argue, but at the same time, I guess if you are being told to do things, you've kind of got two approaches you can take. One of which is whatever, it's the boss's fault or success. The other is to try, almost like you touch it, you own it, and try to take accountability for things anyway, because yes, it sucks to be told to do things and not have as much autonomy as you want, but you can at least try and do some of that kind of product work around the stuff that you are given. And I sometimes recommend to people that they almost retrofit what the research, or not necessarily the research, but like the process that they would have gone through, to, even though they already know the answer, but at least try and answer some of the questions that they would have asked to find out if this is a good thing, and then own the results, versus kind of having this very passive, oh yeah, well fine, the boss said to do it, so yeah, we'll give it back and move on to the next thing, because that's the definition of a feature factory.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Jason, actually. It was one of the most voted ones.
Oh, God.
What AI tool do you use for your images?
I drew all of them. No, I just use, whatever it is, DALL-E, the one that comes with ChatGPT. I mean, I think it's actually been the hero use case for me. I use AI for a lot of things, as does everyone these days, but I think one thing I don't really use it for is outputting text, for example. I don't use it to create posts or any kind of content other than images, throwaway images that don't really matter. Like, I used to go onto Google Images and just find any old picture, paste it in, commit copyright violations all over the place. Whereas these days, the copyright violations have already been committed by the AI companies, so I can use them with a clear heart. So I'm fine with that.
I guess you use a really good description because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't get the same results. So yeah.
A square cartoon of a product. Was it a square cartoon of the concept of product management or something? You just get any old crap come out of it. But to be honest, because it's so low stakes in a presentation, you just put it in. It's fine.
Nice.
No one's going to go away from the presentation saying, "I wish that had a better picture." Hopefully.
Nice. Let me just find the next ones. Okay, so what does a good backlog of change for a product culture look like in practical terms?
Well, I mean, obviously it depends on the company, but I'd say if you can break down the change, let's imagine there's this kind of notional idea of all of the changes that you want to make. Now, you're not going to get to make all of those. Like, hopefully, your idea of change isn't just product, or product operating model, and that's just a big mass. Like, that's what I want. Like, I like to think of it as like, well, yeah. For example, we're not talking to customers very much at the moment. Like maybe the sales team get to do all that, and maybe we're explicitly disallowed from talking to the customers because the sales team say no or the founder says no. Like, I've had discussions with founders before where it's like, oh, yeah, no, you can't talk to customers because you're not an industry expert. You've not been working in the industry for 20 years, so you can't speak to the customers, the sales team. They hadn't worked in the industry for 20 years either, but they were sales teams and they had to. And for me, it's like, okay, well, that's a thing. That's an atomic thing. Like, how can we get, like, that's almost like an objective. Like, how can we speak to more customers? Okay, well, first, maybe our first step is go along with the sales team. Go along with the sales team and maybe not even talk, but just listen and absorb the information. And then maybe we get to ask a few questions at the end, but it's still not as good as it could be. Then maybe we get to go to some low-risk customers that aren't going to churn soon, or that we know that they're kind of friendly people. So we can go and speak to those people. And then after that, maybe having all these different ideas about, like, it's almost like an opportunity solution tree, right? Our opportunity is we want to talk to more customers. It's not really an opportunity, but we want to talk to more, and these are all the different ways that we can do that, and then prioritize the ways. And you're not going to get all of them, but hopefully you get some of them.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
I think you need to know where you're going. Otherwise, change can go. It'll be hard to drive, especially if it involves different teams. You have to have a shared alignment of what the success or what that line looks like. And in my experience, change has always had like very, redundancy processes or change of leadership or like very tough decisions that force you to really accommodate in a different way. So I'd say like you really need to know where you're going, and then there's going to be strong levers that you pull, and then the rest kind of start falling and following through.
So I don't think you can change product culture if it doesn't align with the company culture. And I think the company culture belongs to the leader at the top. There should be the chief culture officer, and they should live it, model it, and help people understand it and what it means in real terms. And I think that's where it begins for me.
Yeah. You join a company for the culture as well, so yeah, it totally makes sense. Next question. I'm still struggling with my. Should mid-career PMs fight the founder mode when it doesn't feel right, and how do they do that without getting fired?
Oh God. Yeah. Controversial.
Yeah, you should. You first. Yeah.
I should start. So I'm very sad that Paul Graham actually published that article. I mean, it just caught fire all over the world, and it was probably the most misunderstood article. And I think we should just burn it and move on. So that's my thought on it as a founder. I hope David can attest to this, but we've never had that conversation about founder mode.
We haven't, it's true.
Exactly, for that reason. I really think at the end of the day, it comes down to mutual respect, number one. And number two, I do believe very strongly that when you've hired people onto your team, understand their genius and respect people's genius. And that's really part of how you form a team. And there's, I just recently said that, David, you're forming a team, but before you can get to norming, you're actually storming quite a bit. And I think that's a very healthy thing, and you should be patient about it. So it's forming, storming, norming, and then performing. And it just takes time. So, yes, please, if you have a copy of it, burn it.
Yeah, hard to know how to follow that. I guess, but interesting. You think it was misunderstood, I guess, and maybe there's some part of his intent that I misunderstood. But I think there's a big part of the experience of the CEOs at that Y Combinator symposium responding to, Brian Chesky's comments that did strongly feel that they, as founders, had handed over reins to others who had done a worse job, and only they could sort of put it right? And I think that is it's just really interesting to know that there are people in that position, and that experience is being had by so many founders. And I guess one of the things I thought reading that article was, of course, by definition, the sample of the founders in that room were some of the most, the highest achieving founders that there have ever been, all in one room, all agreeing on this point. And it could be that in their organizations, they genuinely were so multi-skilled, so unusual as individuals that they were actually kind of able to dive into so many areas of the teams that they'd hired and still add value at every turn. But it's not every company is going to have that feature and that behavior. And I think lots of companies need to prepare to be much more, strength in depth and robust, and hire people and get out of their way. That kind of, those kinds of dynamics are going to make sense, certainly as a sort of risk management technique for so many more companies.
So founder mode, and I've got nothing against founders, by the way, but founder mode is, or the way you described it and the way I thought about it at the time, it was survivorship bias on steroids. It was like, exactly as you say, yeah, great, you get 10, 15 founders from some amazing companies that have made it into a room, and they're like, well, of course they're going to think that they're God's gift, because they've been there and they've done it. And I don't believe for a second that the companies would be the same without them. So 100%, like, they deserve a massive amount of credit, and all founders deserve a massive amount of credit. Like, it's easy for us to sit here and ding founders for kind of being hippos and reaching in and not allowing us to do all the things that we think that we should be doing. But these are the people that started the company. They've basically taken all of the risk up front. They had the original idea, and they've now got frustrated by the fact that it's maybe slowing down a bit, or it's so some of the things just aren't going the way that they thought they would. And then they have this natural instinct to, like, oh, we've probably hired the wrong people. And let's face it, they probably have, because in many cases, these founders, when they're early on, they don't actually know what a good product person looks like, or a good CTO looks like, or a good anything looks like, unless they have expertise in that area. And that doesn't mean that they're doing anything wrong. It just means that they should have got help to try and find someone that could help them make that critical hire. Head with their own plan, and maybe it will, but that's basically that's going to a casino.
Great. One last question. Why do PMs talk so much about culture? Have you heard this one from engineering or other teams as well? And yeah, just as not reply from all of you. I'm curious as well.
Well, I mean, these people will talk about it too. I mean, engineers talk about engineering culture, design talk about design culture, sales team talk about sales culture. They all talk about it. I think the problem is that product management is just one of these things that's the least developed as a trade, and there's such a difference and a variety in the way it's done across so many different organizations that the very concept of a of product culture is almost like a butterfly's wing or something like that. Like it's if you can only touch it, it would break. So I think it's important, or it's kind of been given excessive importance by people that are frustrated at working. First of all, they're being told by these thought leaders out there that they're doing a bad job or that they're not proper product people. They're also probably frustrated internally within organizations because they're being given hassle because maybe the product's not as successful as it could be. And when things do go well, they're not getting as much credit as they could because it was the engineers or the sales team or whoever. So it's kind of a bit of a thankless trade. But they're also being kind of given even less thanks by the people that are telling them that they're doing it wrong, that they're supposed to be looking up to. So I think there's just this craving for it all to make sense. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
The way I see it is product management superseded project management. Project management was a deadline and a success criteria, and that's it. Now that we own a business outcome and it's this iterative and infinite process, you need something to, kind of fill in those holes. And I think product culture has been that term that takes that intangible of things are going to go well, bad, and ugly, and the thing that holds it together is how a team works together and how do they relate amongst each other.
Yeah, Sanjeev, you mentioned earlier kind of like product culture, company culture, and that's for me is the heart of it as well. When we say product, people talk a lot about culture. For me, it's more about the setting, tech, disruption, culture. And this, again, what you said, Jason, it's new, it's in its infancy almost. Like we haven't had to live with this for very long, and lots of in a slower moving world, hunting on the savannah, building, industrial companies, things change slower, less was uncertain, and a new mindset is needed to work in this way. And I think. So that's part of it, tech disruption culture as opposed to product as a function. Product as a function has it extra bad because as a function it is sort of like sandwiched in between some things. In a sense, the product is the nearest thing to the extension of the CEO. Kind of like sales have functional expertise, they know what they do. Engineering have functional expertise, they know what they do. And though in one way or another, those functions have always existed. And product is a new idea in a way that we can externalize that very strategic slice of the CEO's brain and get people to do it, but in that very kind of like, yes, empowered end-to-end, own the objective, not just the output kind of way. So I think, yes, tech and disruption is a new paradigm for sort of human brains, human industrialists to deal with. And then the product managers are the ones right in the eye of the storm of trying to sort of take on the CEO's responsibility for that, but still sort of fit into the organization. They aren't the CEO. And I think those things together create a lot of tension and a lot to explore.
Thank you. Wow. Speaking as someone who has been leading organizations, it's my greatest hope that the impact that we create as an organization is something that comes from the team and not from the founder and the CEO. It's my hope and my ambition to be a facilitator of results and not take credit for the results. And that's just been part of my journey, is learning how to get there. And I guess part of my new journey that I'm hoping someday I will complete, I'm very fascinated by the concept of an old Chinese concept called servant leadership. I'm still struggling with it. But I hope someday that's how I might be remembered.
Nice. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sanjeev, David, Jorge, and Jason. And thank you all so much for coming over. And we still have some time. I don't know if there's any drink left, some food. But yeah, just get over there, network. And thank you so much. And I'll see you in November. Thank you.